We're fragmented people. That's the reality of it. See, we break our lives up into our work lives and our home lives, our church lives, our sports lives, our hobbies, our relationships, and we don't really let these things run into each other. We just subdivide off these little pieces of ourselves and hope that each one can kind of make it on its own. We have our relaxing lives separated from our productive lives. And we hope that our rejuvenating life can make up for all the mistakes that our hardworking and strenuous life can handle. And that maybe someday they'll balance each other out. When I was in high school, I was in drama, and I loved drama. I would study, and I would memorize, I would work together with people, and I would figure out how I could get all those lines in my head and that character in me so that I could be somebody else. And it took a lot of practice, and it was really terrifying, like really terrifying. Like I had major stage fright. I had no business being in drama. But what I figured out is after all of that practice and all of that rehearsing and all of it, just months and months, I'd be able to stand backstage, just a ball of nerves, and then cross that threshold. And when I crossed that threshold, something really awesome would happen every time. If I was rehearsed, I'd step across that threshold and I would become someone else. All of that worry, all that fear, all that anxiety would just melt away, and I could just breathe out this other person. And it was really cool because it was a massive adrenaline rush. And I used that to hide my own insecurities. But I did it in kind of a healthy way because I could entertain and I could do something positive with that as an outgoing of who I was. So it was kind of a two-edged sword. I was hiding who I was, my own insecurities of being on stage, but I was also expressing that and working through it in a positive way to do an awesome thing. After I graduated from high school, I went to college, and then I got a job, and I found out that people do the same thing in a job. People hide who they really are. You see, we're trained to hide who we really are. We're trained to, put up a nice Zoom background to make sure nobody sees who you are, where you're going, what your interests are, or anything really. And you just have a static view of a static life. See, when I got my first job, it was a big corporate job, and I got to do a lot of really cool things. Worked at IBM for a little bit, worked at Rockwell Collins for a little bit, and the cool thing was I got to see a little bit behind the scenes. You see, people always wanted to hide who they were and what they were doing and separate out their professional life from their personal life. And I oftentimes try to break through those. I tried to see what people were hiding. So I followed the example, and I hid my own personal life, and I only showed people the professional pieces that I learned when I was in college. The software engineer, the technician, the leader, and there were some pieces of me that were missing. And I noticed that in other people, every once in a while, there'd be this little crack where I could see into their personal lives just a little bit. And I could see that they're real people too. They had real lives, they had real interests, real passions, and every once in a while, I'd catch a little glimpse. And so I was actually drawn to that, and as a result, I ended up in management. I became a team lead, and I got to see a little bit more, because team leads get to see a little bit more of some of that rough human stuff. That stuff that everybody's always hiding from the rest of the team. That stuff that we're now seeing a little bit. You see, whether or not you see it in a corporate office, people have health scares. People have sick parents. People feel like they're in a dead-end job, or they feel like they're stuck doing something they're not passionate about. And I had the privilege of seeing some of that. And it really made me curious. Can I be all of me at work? Is that even possible? And so I set out on this journey to figure out, can I be my whole self at work? Is that better? Is that actually helpful, desirable? I don't know. What's interesting is that these COVID times, lockdown and Zoom, is making it so that we can actually see into other people's lives in ways that we've never been able to see into people's lives before. Because you've got people, especially very much at the beginning, people didn't have a work from home setup necessarily. So you could see into their living room. You could see into their bedroom, maybe their closet. Sometimes they'd have kids running by. Sometimes they'd have a dog jump into their lap, or the doorbell ring for a delivery. Sometimes you'd see roommates. Sometimes people would have to leave because something was going down with school, with their kids. And somehow, in this tragedy, work collided with life. And it seems like work should have collided with life all along. And somehow we had figured out how to separate the two. COVID has provided an interesting opportunity. You see, it let us see through some of those cracks in ways that a lot of team leads and managers have seen, but ways that a lot of the rest of the workforce hasn't. You see, we get to see into people's living rooms, into their kitchens and their closets, when their cat interrupts, or if they have to leave because something's going on with their kid. We're getting a glimpse into these cracks that are showing us that people aren't one-dimensional drones. They don't just come to work and fix the code, or fill out the report, or who knows what they do over there sitting in their cubicle. They're human beings. They have a life, they have passions, they have desires, they have weaknesses, they have frustrations, short tempers, they have dinner time. They've got life. And we have spent far too long pretending like everybody around us is just a one-dimensional drone. And that's not okay. And so you ask, how do you bring your whole self to work? Should you? I would argue it actually is helpful, and you can actually be more productive, more helpful, more engaging with your coworkers. How do we do that if on the inside we really are just sniveling heaps of emotions, insecure, and feeling like we don't have anything to bring to the table? That's how I feel a lot of the time. In fact, that's how I felt a lot of the time leading up to last year's DevCon. Because last year, I decided that I was going to do something completely different. I was going to bring my whole self and talk about workplace happiness and what truly, underneath it all, makes it possible to have happiness no matter where you're working. And it was really hard for me because an integral part of that was my faith. And I was taught growing up, and I was taught in every job I've ever had, that faith has no place in the workplace. That the things you never talk about are religion and politics. Well, it turns out that those are things that are close to people's hearts. Those are things that people have very strong opinions on, not for short conversations, not for little snippets and sound bites, but for actual hard conversation. And so bringing that last year really opened up my perspective to how it could actually be useful, how I can actually use everything that I am and bring it to work. And maybe, just maybe, I'd be better for it. How do you do this? I've got 3 tips, 3 things that can help. The first one is to act decisively, genuinely, transparently. Easy, right? That's the first one. That's not all 3. Acting genuinely and transparently is actually really hard. And that doesn't mean coming out and yelling at people and telling people your opinion is right and theirs is wrong. There's more on that later. What that means is trying to not divide out who you are into another piece. It means, in practice, caring about the people around you, asking about what's going on in their life, and being willing to talk about what's going on in your life. So, invite somebody out. Say, hey, let's have lunch. Especially over Zoom, super easy because they're gonna need lunch at home, you're gonna need lunch at home, and you both have Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is you use. You can say, let's have a talk. I just want to hear your story. What is your story? And you'll be surprised. A lot of people have really cool stories. Where they grew up, how they grew up, hobbies they tried, things that got them into the field that they're in, things they're passionate about on the side. One of my favorite things to ask somebody is, what do you do for fun? Because a lot of people, for some reason, have a very poor view of their job. But they almost always have a very high view of what they do for fun. Because they do it for fun. And something that people are passionate about makes great conversation. I usually learn a lot about stuff along the way. So, pull somebody aside. Say, hey, tell me your story. Because what that does is it does 2 things. The first thing it does is, inside of you, it makes you think of them as a whole person, not just whatever their job title is. Engineer, designer, marketing, sales, whatever their title is, it makes you think outside of that. And so it does some work in you. But it also does some work in them. Because what it says to them is, I care about you. You have meaning and purpose. I'm not just trying to get something out of this. I actually care for you because you are a human being that's in my proximity. And that means something. And that changes people. It'll change their reaction to you. It'll change how much of a caricature you make of them and how much of a caricature they make of you. We end up making these false pictures of people, and then we attack the false picture instead of engaging with human beings. And that's dangerous. So, act genuinely and decisively, move forward with confidence past that feeling of nervousness and fear. Just like when I was in drama, especially with practice. Once you cross that threshold, you move past your insecurities and you move into something that's actually really awesome and pretty fulfilling. The second thing is to love goodness, kindness, and compassion. And to love it means that you really want it for yourself and for others. That's hard. That's hard sometimes. I definitely meet people where I'm like, I don't really want goodness and kindness for this person. Which means I need to check myself, because we're all in this together. We're all going through struggles. We all have insecurities. We're all human. And we need each other to get through all of this. What's one way that you can actually do something about that? One thing you can do is you can keep an eye out for emotional bids. It's these cracks. And this Dr. John Gottman, had this whole study that he did. It was popularized in Malcolm Gladwell's book called Blink. So if you've read that book, this might sound familiar. An emotional bid is when somebody goes out on a ledge emotionally to do something. A lot of times it's actually subconscious. So I had an awesome weekend, and then they pause. What they're actually doing is they're saying, please ask me about my weekend. An emotional bid can be anything from something like that that's super obvious to a sigh at the end of a statement. Because they're asking, they're begging. Something deep inside of each and every single one of us wants so badly to have a human connection. And that's not weakness. That's being human. And so we can respond to that by either saying, I accept you. I want to know you. Or you can respond by saying, you have no value and I don't care about you at all. And your response has more to do with you than it does them. The third thing that you can do is you can walk in humility. And this one is also hard. These are all hard. Because none of us have actually figured this out, this human thing. All the people that say they figured it out harbor a lot of anxiety inside and are trying to figure life out too. Usually they're trying to sell a book so they can feel validated that they have it figured out. The most joyful people are the people who acknowledge that they don't have it figured out, and they come into life with a humble attitude. So walking in humility, recognizing that you don't have all the answers, that you don't have everything figured out, and that you're willing to give somebody else that kind of grace and leeway as well. So how do you do that? One way that I found effective is to go on long walks. Some people do meditation. Some people do, I don't know, fishing or skiing or things that take you away to something else that's bigger and grander than you. Stargazing is a great one. Me, I like walks. But it's not just any kind of walk. It's the kind of walk where I'm silent and I look at the things around me and I turn that into gratitude for things that I see around me that I didn't work for, that I don't deserve, or that other people have worked just as hard for or more and they didn't get it, which means that I could have worked as hard for or harder and still not received it. I have nice fitting clothes. I have a beautiful bald head. I have a house. I have a family that loves me. I don't deserve any of those things, because I know a lot of people that have worked very hard that are missing some of those things through no fault of their own. So that shouldn't make me feel like I'm deserving of those or better than. What that should do is that should work on my heart so that I am more grateful and thankful for the things that I do have. So thankfulness and humility go hand in hand, because one of them leads to the other one. Humility leads to thankfulness. It also changes how you interact with people, because some people are very bullish in their opinions, and even if I think they're dead wrong, if I humble myself, I can still approach that conversation with respect. I can still approach that conversation with I'm fairly certain that this is the way things are. And if you'll dialogue with me, if you'll work with me, maybe we can see each other's point of view and how we got there. Because I don't know where you came from. You might not know where I came from. Maybe I should hear your story. Maybe I should share a little bit of my story. We can figure out how we got here, how we got to disagreement, how we got to frustration. And we can figure it out together. You can only do that through humility. Because if you think you already have the answers, why would you bother hearing them out? We're fragmented people. We've divided our lives into a bunch of different pieces. And we're in a place right now where the cracks are starting to show. And this isn't a new problem. This isn't a problem for the modern era. This is a very, very old problem. In fact, in the 8th century BC, there was a man by the name of Micah of Moresheth. It's a fun place. And he had some things to say about this. He said, "You have an image to keep up. You have passions to strive after, missions to devote your life to, money to be distracted by. But what is actually required? To do what is right, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." You see, we're fragmented people. And it's not new. But there's these 3 things that we can do about it. We can do what is right. We can love kindness and compassion. And we can walk in humility. Last year, on workplace happiness, I gave so many different suggestions on things you could do. And honestly, I don't know if any of them were actually followed through on. So this time I'm just doing 3. The first thing is to ask somebody about their life. Show genuineness and transparency. Invite somebody to lunch and ask about their story so that you can know more about them. The second thing is to follow up on some of those emotional bids. When people are asking, they're begging to be known, to be heard, follow up, reach out to them. Make sure that you are letting them know that you care about who they are as a whole person, not just as a drone, not just as somebody that can do something for you, but who they are. And the third thing is to go on a long walk. Think about the things in your life that are bigger than you, that you don't deserve, so you can build that humility, so you can build that genuineness, so you can build that kindness. I don't know if anybody's actually going to do these things, but I think these three things are three things that we desperately need in these times when we're isolated, when we're separated, when we're by ourselves working in our offices, wondering if anybody actually cares and if any of it really matters. Like, what are we doing? We need to be building these communities. We need to be building these relationships, because in the end, those are the things that matter. We need to figure out how to bring our whole selves to work, to church, to sports, into our politics, into our every bit of our lives, because we can't keep on living as fragmented people. We are whole people, and we need to start acting like it. These COVID times have really made it obvious that there's more to people's lives than meets the eye. So it's time to stop pretending. It's time to start doing something about it. I'm trying to. I hope you are too.